We, as a civilization, are forced to operate on a data set that is laughably limited. We gaze in awe into the abyss of the universe, naively believing that we can comprehend it in its entirety, that we see everything as it is. And in this lies our deepest, most fundamental error. Try to imagine the following scenario. You are tasked with understanding the operating principle of a highly complex, self-learning artificial intelligence, but for your analysis, you are given access to only 5% of its source code. This is an utter absurdity. Any conclusions you draw based on such a minuscule fragment would not just be inaccurate, they would be fundamentally wrong, leading in a direction completely opposite to the truth. It is precisely in this paradoxical situation that we, humanity, find ourselves at this moment. All of our modern physics, everything that our instruments and measurements can detect, light in its visible and invisible spectrums, all forms of radiation, gravity in its familiar Newtonian and Einsteinian understanding, all of this constitutes those same meager 5%. We are incredibly proud of the elegance and predictive power of our physical laws, but these laws describe only a tiny, almost insignificant slice of true reality. This pride is akin to that of a man who, having built an excellent, sturdy doghouse, on that basis proclaims himself an unsurpassed expert in the construction of skyscrapers. And it is on this stage where our ignorance is so vast that the concept of dark matter appears. Most people perceive it as a kind of missing piece in the cosmic puzzle, as another scientific problem that simply needs to be solved by finding the right formula. This is a fundamentally incorrect approach. Dark matter is not a problem. It is a loud signal of a systemic error in the very foundation of our worldview. The universe is literally screaming at us that 95% of its total mass operates according to entirely different, alien rules. Rules that we have not even dared to begin to comprehend. This is not just a gap in our knowledge. It is a deafening slap to our intellectual arrogance. And it gets even bigger. Some of the brightest minds of our time are now actively developing an idea that, at first glance, certainly sounds like pure science fiction. But to dismiss it without delving into its essence would be the height of short-sightedness. The mirror universe. It sounds intriguing, doesn't it? But what does this term mean from a pragmatic engineering perspective? We are not talking about some magical fairy tale copy of our world inhabited by an evil twin of Elon Musk with a goatee. Such a literal copy would likely be extremely inefficient in terms of information and energy expenditure. We are talking about a deeper principle, a fundamental symmetry embedded in the very fabric of existence. What if every elementary particle in our observable universe has an invisible partner, a kind of shadow counterpart, that interacts with the world through a completely different dark force, yet is inextricably linked to our familiar matter through the unified field of gravity? And this is where the truly mind-bending questions begin. Is this mirror world a complete, exact copy of ours? Or do entirely different physical laws operate there? Is it possible that time in it flows backward, from the future to the past? Or is this entire concept nothing more than an elegant mathematical model? A convenient stopgap that helps us temporarily make our calculations add up until we come up with something more advanced? We must be brutally honest with ourselves. We do not know. We are at the very, very earliest stage of understanding. Much like people in the 15th century trying to reason about the principles of quantum entanglement. But to consciously ignore this possibility is to voluntarily condemn ourselves to an eternal stay in Plato's cave, mesmerized by the shadows on the wall, sincerely believing that these vague outlines are the entire world. Our main task, our civilizational duty, is to find a way out of this cave. And it is quite possible that dark matter is that very signpost, that very path leading outward toward the light of true reality. The fascination with this idea is by no means new. In the history of science, there have been theories suggesting a dual universe moving backward in time, where the arrow of time originates from the same point of minimum entropy as ours, but points in the opposite direction. According to such a scenario, our Big Bang would not be the absolute beginning of everything, but rather a point of universal symmetry, a kind of cosmic Janus looking simultaneously in two opposite temporal directions. Other hypotheses suggested that this shadow reflection would consist entirely of antimatter, coexisting with our world but separated from it by some insurmountable energy barrier. And finally, the most captivating concept, one that stirs the imagination of the general public: the existence of a perfect duplicate of everything we know, but completely invisible to our senses and instruments, interacting with us solely through gravity. A silent and impenetrable, hidden framework supporting the visible cosmos, like a skeleton of shadow upon which the flesh of reality is supported. The difficulty is that, like any truly powerful idea, the mirror universe has over time transformed into an extremely flexible label, applied to describe completely different, sometimes even contradictory, phenomena. This conceptual malleability is extremely dangerous, as it creates an illusion, an appearance of theoretical unity, where in reality, there are only disparate, unrelated assumptions. And this becomes painfully obvious upon detailed analysis of recent scientific papers that have spawned the current wave of speculation. Instead of a perfect, symmetrical cosmic reflection, we find something more akin to a shattered, carelessly assembled mosaic, a collection of hypothetical particles that at best bear only a distant, superficial resemblance to the elements of our standard model, but diverge from it in almost all key fundamental aspects. Imagine you walk up to a mirror and looking into it see, not your own face, but someone else's entirely. Perhaps the face of someone famous, charismatic, and completely unlike you. Your first impression is intrigue, maybe even amusing surprise, but soon it gives way to an unsettling feeling of strangeness, of wrongness. This is not a reflection, but an imposter. This is precisely the feeling that arises when one encounters the proposition that some researchers present as irrefutable evidence for the existence of a mirror universe. The author of one such study postulates the existence of about 100 completely new particles, organized in a similar, but by no means identical, way to the structure of the quarks and leptons we know. They are different enough not to conform to the strict concept of a copy, but at the same time, close enough to support a seductive, captivating narrative. These hypothetical particles, according to the proposed model, could have actively clumped together in the early universe, forming primordial black holes which, unlike ordinary ones, were not affected by Hawking radiation, and therefore still roamed the cosmos as the elusive dark matter. This possibility, it must be admitted, is not trivial. Primordial black holes as dark matter suggest a universe where a significant portion of what we call cosmic structure consists of invisible and virtually indestructible entities, silent witnesses to the very first fraction of a second after the Big Bang. But there is one substantial, critically important detail here. The evidence for such a scenario is entirely indirect. It is a hypothesis based not on the discovery of something, but on the contrary, on its absence. In other words, the long-standing failure to detect dark matter particles in numerous experiments leads to the conclusion that they may not interact with our instruments at all. This is akin to trying to prove a room is empty, not by opening the door, but by listening intently to the absence of any sounds from within. This form of reasoning is not uncommon in theoretical physics, but in this case, it ventures into particularly dangerous, shaky territory. The line between a plausible scientific hypothesis and pure fiction becomes razor-thin and non-falsifiable theories. That is, those that are in principle untestable, gain increasing popularity under the guise of mathematical sophistication and complexity. The mirror universe ceases to be a concrete scientific hypothesis, and for some becomes a convenient screen onto which all our hopes, fears, and gaping holes in our understanding of the world are projected. What is troubling is not the boldness of the assumption itself, but the active use of a compelling narrative to mask its speculative, conjectural nature, which is practically inaccessible to any experimental verification. At this moment, it is impossible not to feel a growing internal tension. Have we stumbled upon a real key to unlocking the greatest mystery of dark matter? Or is this just another vivid example of how fundamental physics can succumb to the irresistible charm of beautiful metaphors? Moreover, doesn't the very need to constantly attract public attention and, importantly, funding, distort the way such concepts are presented to both the general public and the academic community itself? There is a hidden, deep, micro-conflict between the noble desire to explore the unknown and the strict duty to adhere to the principles of scientific integrity and testability. And it is precisely in this high-tension field that the concept of the mirror universe exists, incredibly seductive, but shrouded in thick shadows of doubt. I'm intrigued not only by the essence of these theories, but also by what their growing popularization says about the state of modern science. When an idea so far from a strict scientific definition penetrates the headlines of world newspapers and receives tacit approval from respected scientific journals and universities, we must ask ourselves, are we approaching the real truth? Or are we simply perfecting the art of telling compelling, captivating stories? The answer remains unclear for now, like a blurred, trembling reflection that we are unable to decipher. And yet, in this ambiguity, there is something that irresistibly draws us in, something that subtly hints that a true, great revelation is yet to come. Because perhaps, if we look more closely, we will not just see our own reflection. We will see something that, by definition, should not be there. And it is right here, at this point of anomaly, that the real story begins. A reflection in the details. Imagine for a moment that you wake up on a perfectly ordinary day, go to the kitchen faucet, turn it on, and after taking a sip of water, you sense something subtly different about it. The taste is the same, the clarity is perfect, but there is an almost imperceptible feeling, on the edge of perception, that this water is not quite yours. You can't explain why, you can't find the words, but you intuitively know something is not right here. This is precisely how concepts like the mirror universe begin to seep into our daily lives, even without our conscious awareness. Not as distant, abstract debates among physicists at highly specialized conferences, but as small, silent distortions that subtly influence our interpretation of the world around us. When we talk about dark matter and parallel universes, many people involuntarily picture themselves in a cold, sterile laboratory, surrounded by highly complex billion-dollar equipment. But deep down, these grandiose ideas resonate with something much more personal and intimate, with the everyday awareness of the simple fact that not everything important in this world is visible. How many times in your life have you trusted someone without having any concrete evidence of their reliability? How many times have you made a life-altering decision based more on intuition, on an inner voice, than on hard facts and logical reasoning? Cutting-edge physics and ordinary human life, strangely enough, face the same fundamental dilemma: the necessity of acting based on what cannot be seen or measured, but can be clearly felt. Scientists postulate the existence of dark matter because they observe gravitational effects in the cosmos that cannot be explained by the known laws of physics. You experience something very similar when you suddenly realize that there are invisible forces shaping your life, but you cannot pinpoint their source. A random glance from a stranger that inexplicably changes your mood for the entire day. A seemingly insignificant conversation that subtly adjusts your long-term plans. Or that one day when, it seems, everything conspired against you for no apparent reason. These are all the gravitational anomalies of human experience, invisible threads that gently but persistently guide your life's path. In this sense, the mirror universe is much more than just a physical concept. It is a living, breathing metaphor for our own psyche. Inside each of you, there's a kind of inner mirror that reflects not only who you are at this moment, but also projects countless possible versions of who you could become. With every choice made, with every impulse suppressed or realized, you energize one of these reflections. It is as if 100 invisible internal particles, exactly like those hypothetical particles from the study we discussed, are engaged in a continuous struggle for the right to form the cumulative mass of your personality. Some of these potential selves remain inactive, invisible shadows, while others are embodied in concrete decisions and actions, defining your unique life trajectory. Consider a simple, everyday example: the decision to move to a new city. For some, it is a purely practical matter, reducible to numbers: a job, the cost of living, career opportunities. But on a deeper, subconscious level, there are always invisible aspects that tip the scales one way or the other. Unspoken fears, ghosts of the past, memories insistently pulling you back, and vague visions of the future that have not yet become reality, but already possess their own gravity, all play an unseen role in this choice. These forces are not registered by any detectors of rationality. They are your personal dark matter. And just as with physicists, your ignorance of these forces does not mean they aren't influencing your every step. There is another, rather unpleasant parallel: the deliberate or unconscious distortion of information. Just as a prestigious university might publish a high-profile study on the mirror universe with colorful illustrations that inaccurately, and at times incorrectly, convey its true essence, we also constantly create personal press releases, stories we tell ourselves and others to make our own lives seem more coherent and meaningful. How many times have you slightly softened or, conversely, exaggerated the details of a story to make it sound more logical and favorable to you? Deep down, we are all curators and guardians of our own reality, unilaterally deciding what to show the world and what to hide forever in the shadows. And often, we start to believe so strongly in this edited, embellished reflection that we completely forget the true, sometimes uncomfortable, essence of what happened. In physics, when a hypothesis is supported only by unconvincing, indirect evidence, it may mean that we are desperately chasing a mirage. And in life? How many of our ambitious projects, close relationships, and firm convictions are based on misinterpretations or a complete lack of reliable information? How often do we stubbornly follow a chosen path simply because it feels right, consciously ignoring numerous signs of its shaky foundation? The thought that we might be living not in a real, but in a kind of mirror and highly distorted version of the universe is equally unsettling for both rigorous science and our own personalities. What if the reflection we trust the most, our own self-image, is just as inaccurate and far from reality as the popular concept of a mirror world being pushed on us by the media? What if we are building our entire lives based on a set of fictional internal particles, beautiful and convincing in words, but completely devoid of real substance? Acknowledging this unsettling possibility is not a surrender or a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it is the first, most important step toward one day mustering the courage to shatter this distorted mirror and finally come into contact with true, undistorted reality. This is why this conversation goes far beyond theoretical astrophysics. It is about you, about me, about how each of us daily filters, distorts, and interprets the world around us. By realizing that visible reality is only a small part of something much, immeasurably larger, we open up an internal space for doubting what just yesterday seemed unshakable and indisputable. This is not just about finding ready-made answers, but about learning to ask the right, deep questions that expose what is so carefully hidden from a superficial glance. If this mental journey provokes, troubles, or inspires you, it means there is something within you that responds vividly to this call to knowledge. So, before we continue, take this opportunity to subscribe to this channel and give this video a like. Do it not for a soulless algorithm, but so that we can continue this important dialogue. A dialogue that is not satisfied with simple, ready-made answers. But understand, what we are considering here is still the surface layer. The real spiral of discovery into which many instinctively avoid plunging is presented in the ebook, The Creator's Mind. The link to it is in the pinned comment or in the QR code on the screen. But I strongly advise you to read it only if you are truly ready to encounter something unprecedented. Because ultimately, understanding the mirror universe is also a deep understanding of your own reflection and making the key decision to continue just looking at it or to take the step and walk through the mirror, an invisible fracture in the fabric of reality. If there is a point in science where rigorous physics ceases to be an ordered set of laws and turns into a bottomless conceptual abyss, it happens precisely when we begin to speak seriously about that which is fundamentally immeasurable. And this changes absolutely everything. The concept of a mirror universe, which previously seemed like an exotic curiosity for intellectuals, now suddenly claims the role of a potentially indispensable source of information for explaining not only the mystery of dark matter, but also the numerous structural defects in our own seemingly coherent model of reality. It is here that the narrative ceases to be comfortable and predictable. Have you ever noticed how some mysteries in life do not resolve over time but only multiply, becoming ever more entangled? It is like a desperate attempt to trace the path of an underground river. Each new discovery, each uncovered cavern, does not bring us closer to the coveted source, but instead leads to another dark tributary, descending even deeper into labyrinths we never knew existed. Dark matter is this invisible, powerful river. We have detected its unseen presence by observing entire galaxies rotating at impossible speeds that should have long ago torn them apart, and by seeing giant star clusters maintain their integrity despite a blatant lack of visible mass for their gravitational cohesion. But every time we try to capture this mysterious matter directly with our most sensitive detectors, it slips away, like the finest sand through our fingers. And here, a deep, cognitive dissonance arises. If dark matter truly consists of mirror particles, they could be dancing around us right now, myriads of them passing through our bodies, the walls of our homes, the planet itself, and not a single detector, not even the most advanced, would register them. Imagine walking down a bustling central street of a metropolis but seeing no one, only feeling an invisible pressure, the density of the shared space created by a crowd of ghosts. Now, mentally extend this feeling to the entire cosmos. This hypothesis requires us not only to humbly accept the existence of some other side, but also to acknowledge that it may literally be superimposed on our own reality, like two different films projected simultaneously onto the same screen, with independent but inevitably and bizarrely intertwined plots. If it is true that a mirror universe actually exists and interacts with our world solely through gravity, this implies something staggering. Most of what determines the fate of our cosmos, its structure, evolution, and ultimate outcome, does not belong to what we are accustomed to calling our universe. It is like an invitation to a grand cosmic game where the rules are set by invisible players. You might naively believe you are in complete control of the situation, but in reality, you are simply reacting reflexively to the actions of forces you can neither see nor understand. There is an even bolder, and therefore more disturbing theory. Some theoretical physicists suggest that the mirror universe is not just a static, parallel collection of particles, but a dynamic system that responds sensitively to events in our universe. In this scenario, every major gravitational event here, the merger of black holes, a supernova explosion, a collision of galaxies, could generate responsive waves, a kind of echo in the mirror universe. And likewise, events occurring there could cause subtle but measurable effects here. This silent, deep interconnection means that we inhabit a single, interdependent cosmos, where the history of one side is subtly reflected in the other, shaping large-scale structures and perhaps even influencing the conditions for the emergence of life. Now stop for a moment and think. What if some of the anomalies we have already recorded but cannot explain? Strange gravitational events without a visible cause, inexplicable fluctuations in the cosmic microwave background, unforeseen changes in the rate of the universe's expansion, are actually direct interventions, echoes of events from the other side. This changes everything. We would no longer be talking about a closed, self-sufficient universe, but a permeable reality with porous, penetrable boundaries through which not only gravitational influence, but possibly also information, and perhaps even energy, could seep. But the world of physics is extremely cautious. Equations allow for the boldest conceptual games, but the rigorous scientific method demands irrefutable proof. And here arises the main practical question. How, in what way, can we detect something that, by its very definition, does not interact with light or any form of ordinary matter? Some scientific groups are trying to find indirect answers to this question. They are searching for barely perceptible distortions in the trajectories of dwarf satellite galaxies, looking for symmetrical, unnatural patterns in the effects of gravitational lensing, and listening for faint echoes in the signals of gravitational waves that could be signatures of mirror cosmic cataclysms. So far, nothing conclusive. But here is an unpleasant methodological detail. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when it comes to something that theoretically might never provide us with direct, indisputable proof of its existence. This is a real cognitive trap. If we allow that something can exist even in the complete absence of direct evidence, how can we distinguish a breakthrough, visionary hypothesis from sophisticated, mathematically beautiful fiction? It is on this thin line that science and philosophy regard each other with deep suspicion. Physics demands numbers, precise predictions, and repeatable experiments. Philosophy, however, gently reminds us that even numbers and axioms themselves grow from invisible premises, from basic assumptions about the nature of reality that we also cannot measure in the strict sense of the word. And it is at this moment that the concept of the mirror universe extends far beyond the laboratory. It begins to directly engage with our everyday logic and life experience. How many times in your life have you made an important decision guided by an invisible internal calculation, an intuition that could not be proven logically but felt like the only correct and inevitable path? How many relationships, opportunities, and risks have you accepted or rejected without any reliance on concrete, verifiable data, but simply because something inside told you it was the right or, conversely, the wrong way to go? It is as if every person has their own hidden internal physics, their own set of unaccounted for forces and invisible interactions shaping their life trajectories. The analogy goes even further. In physics, when two different theories explain the same phenomena equally well, but one of them requires the introduction of fewer invisible entities, we instinctively prefer the simpler one. This is the famous principle of Occam's razor. But what do we do when the simpler theory is fundamentally unable to explain what we observe? It is this fundamental contradiction that prompts even the most skeptical scientists today to openly consider the possibility of a mirror universe. Perhaps modern physics is approaching a tipping point where, to preserve the integrity of the overall picture of the world, it will be necessary to accept an even greater, non-intuitive complexity. And this deeply affects our innate tendency to simplify and seek elegant solutions. Some researchers argue that the mirror universe could be a kind of shortcut to unifying a whole range of disparate cosmological anomalies into a single, coherent picture. Others go even further. They suggest that this duplicated reality could serve as a vast information repository, elegantly resolving deep paradoxes such as the black hole information loss problem. Within this bold logic, everything that irretrievably disappears here could be safely preserved there, inaccessible to us, but kept intact. This sounds utterly absurd. And perhaps it is. But it also sounds dangerously elegant. What if life as we know it also has its reflection there? Not an exact copy of you personally, but a fundamental translation of your informational configuration into the language of the laws and particles of that other universe. This idea dangerously flirts with science fiction, but carries with it a perfectly legitimate existential concern. If something like this is real, it means that we are just one of many possible versions of ourselves, and that a large, perhaps the main, part of our true existence may be unfolding in places or states that we can never experience directly. Such reflections are destabilizing. They force us to admit that our most established ideas about identity, causality, and even free will may be based on only half of the whole story. It is like reading a captivating, thrilling book without ever suspecting the existence of a second volume, written simultaneously, whose chapters radically change the meaning of the first, though the reader never even notices. So, perhaps the right question is not, does the mirror universe exist? But what changes for us if it does exist? For if this parallel reality truly influences ours, we can no longer consider ourselves neutral observers. We are pieces on a giant chessboard that extends far beyond what we can see. And any invisible player can, at any moment, move the pieces that we naively think we completely control. But there is something even more radical. What if the mirror universe is not an other universe, but a hidden dimension existing within ourselves that we simply have not yet learned to perceive? In that case, we would not be talking about two separate interacting systems, but about a single, yet extremely poorly understood system. This hypothesis completely erases familiar boundaries and suggests that the entire mystery lies not out there in the distant cosmos, but rather in the fundamental limitations of our own sensory and intellectual apparatus. If this is the case, then the greatest revolution in knowledge will not be technological, but cognitive. It will depend not on more powerful telescopes or more sensitive detectors, but on a radical change in our way of thinking and modeling reality. Perhaps the door to the mirror universe will be opened not with a physical key particle, but with a purely conceptual leap that we have not yet dared to make. And when such a staggering possibility appears on the horizon, something subtly changes within us, because we begin to realize that not only the cosmos can have a hidden dark side, but so can human consciousness itself. And perhaps, by exploring the mirror of the universe, we are actually finding a mirror of ourselves, which, ultimately, means one thing. This search offers us no guaranteed answers, but it promises to shake our confidence to its very core. And it is here, on the brink of this coming shift, that the story ceases to be pure science and becomes a territory where everything, absolutely everything, could be on the verge of irreversible rearrangement. Echoes of shadows. In 2016, a group of astronomers conducting routine observations discovered something seemingly nonsensical and illogical. A dwarf galaxy orbiting our Milky Way, named Dragonfly 44, had an estimated mass close to that of our own galaxy, yet it contained only 1% of the stars it should have had. Everything else was invisible. Subsequent measurements showed that 99% of this gigantic structure consists of dark matter. No flares, no electromagnetic signals, nothing. Just pure, silent gravitational choreography holding it all together. A giant cosmic ghost silently hovering in intergalactic space. A discovery like this doesn't make screaming headlines like the latest color photograph from the James Webb Space Telescope, but it carries something far more unsettling and fundamental. Dragonfly 44 is the cosmic equivalent of a 100-story building standing in the middle of a bustling city, but with all its windows completely blacked out, from which not a single sound emerges. The structure exists. It is solid and massive, but to our perception, it is utterly uninhabited. And when we realize that such dark buildings might be scattered in abundance throughout the universe, the scale of their resounding absence becomes an almost unbearable psychological burden. This ghost galaxy is far from unique. Modern catalogs of astronomical observations already show hundreds of examples of objects where visible matter, stars, gas, dust, is merely a thin, almost decorative shell, a beautiful but fragile support for what we fundamentally cannot see. And here is a detail that is very rarely discussed outside of specialized scientific conferences. In many cases, the distribution of this invisible matter appears surprisingly organized. It is not random noise. It is not absolute chaos. It forms well-defined halos, stretches into long filaments, and creates complex patterns vaguely reminiscent of neural networks in the human brain or complex biological systems. Is this a mere coincidence? Or are we witnessing the manifestation of some hidden geometry, governed by rules we do not yet understand at all? Think back to the last time in your life you observed something too organized to be a simple, blind accident. It could have been the perfect spiral symmetry of a seashell, the almost mathematically precise rhythm of ocean waves, or the way a huge flock of birds in the sky seems to follow a single, invisible plan.